Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for being a couple of minutes late, but you've just heard one of our councillors trying to get in, says Colchester's look solid, the roads apparently, so we're now all present. Welcome to this evening's committee. My name is Councillor White, John White, and I'm the chairman. On my left is my vice chairman, Councillor Heaney. The other councillors who are members of this committee are sitting on the tables each side of the room. They will be the members that will be debating and voting on the applications in front of us tonight. On my left and right are TDC officers, including Head of Planning and the committee solicitor. This is a formal committee meeting, and it's important that the councillors can hear all the presentations and so they can debate them faithfully. Therefore, I'll ask that you don't interrupt any of the speakers. The order of business tonight will be, first, the officer will give a presentation on each of the applications. Then we'll have any public speaking, if there is any, although there's very limited amount tonight. Any further comment from the officer, and then finally the committee members will ask questions, debate and finally vote on the application. I should add that this meeting is being recorded by the council. Right, so we will go straight to item 1 and apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Everett with Councillor Val Guglielmi as his substitute, and also Councillor Benison with no substitute. And just a note, Councillor Corfron is absent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So turn to the minutes of the last meeting, that was the 28th of March, and ask if there are any comments, omissions, errors in those minutes. And there's nothing shown, therefore could I sign those as a true and correct record, please?
Yes.
I have a proposer and a seconder. Thank you very much. That I will do. And then we get to the declarations of interest on any of the items that are in front of us tonight. Are there any declarations, in which case I have to declare that I have a personal interest in agenda item A3, that is 1500578, in that I have relatives who own the adjacent property to the site. I also have to declare that I am predetermined on the application, and as such, when we get to that item, I will vacate the chair and speak from the gallery and not take part in any part of determining this application. Right, in which case we move, as there were no other declarations, we move straight to agenda item 4. This is planning application 16-00500. It's an outline application for Tamarisk, 19 the Street, Kirby-le-Soken. And turn to Head of Planning, I believe, who's going to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, there are a couple of updates on the on members' green sheets. It's the sort of first half of that first page. The first one is that there's reference within the report to this being a full application, but it isn't. It's an outline application, so apologies for that. If you'll remember, members, this was actually put on an agenda for last October. Since then, the issues and rules around Section 106s have changed, and so there's no longer a requirement on a development of this scale to make contributions through 106 agreements. So those references should have been deleted when we updated the report, but that was missed. So that needs to be removed. Those references need to be removed, which also affects the recommendation. There's no requirement for contributions through 106 agreements. There were a couple of errors in terms of policy numbers, but not policy names or content. And then lastly, the Great Crested Newt assessment, it refers to the proposal being for 3 bungalows and 7 houses, whereas in fact it's for 4 and 6. However, the plan that was used to do the assessment was the correct plan. There's just been a bit of an issue through the course of this application about the description of development and how to capture what happens on the site, but I'll explain that in my main presentation. So, as I've said, this is an outline application. Access and layout of the proposal are to be considered at this stage, but appearance, scale and landscaping are reserved for consideration at a later stage. The application seeks permission for 4 bungalows and 6 houses. There are currently 2 dwellings on the site. Members will have seen those on the site visit. Under this proposal, one of those would be demolished, the other would be altered and added to make a pair of semi-detached houses. This application is being reported to the Planning Committee at the request of Councillor Buke, who raised a number of objections to the proposal. This slide shows the site outlined in red, and then the land to the south of the site is blue land, so that's other land in the applicant's control. This land to the east isn't relevant to the application. It just happens to be outlined in a darker pen. So the site lies to the south of the street in Kirby-le-Soken. There is an existing access into the site between numbers 19 and 21. 19 is the house that would be altered and added to, and number 21 is the bungalow that would be demolished under this proposal. There's a hall to the west of the site, and then there's a Grade 2-star listed church, and I'll talk about the impacts on that later in the presentation. So there's a Google image of the site, which is down here. There's number 19, number 21, the hall and the church, and the bulk of the site is in here, currently sort of garden land relating to the properties at the front. This slide shows members the site in relation to the site development boundaries in the 2007 adopted plan and the 2017 emerging plan. So here is the site in relation to this boundary in the adopted plan. So you can see the front of the site, so really the existing garden areas of the 2 current properties are within, and the remainder of the site is outside and it's within the green gap designation, albeit at that point the green gap is sort of enclosed in a way on 3 sides by this existing built development. In the emerging plan, here's the site, wholly within the settlement boundary. Some weight can be given to the emerging local plan. As members will know, it's been submitted to government for examination, so it's well on its way through the process towards adoption at this stage. Within the local plan, Kirby-le-Soken is identified as a smaller rural settlement where small-scale development, up to 10 dwellings, would normally be supported. And the settlement boundaries in the emerging plan have been deliberately drawn loosely around existing development in some places to allow for this type of limited development, to allow some limited expansion in the rural settlements. You can also see on this plan there are some existing buildings on the site, and no doubt you will have seen those today. In determining this application, the Council must consider the impact on heritage assets, so the existing character of the area, the listed church adjacent, and the conservation area, which is bounded by that purple line. The MPPF says that where a proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of those designated heritage assets, then the harm should be weighed against the public benefits, in this case of adding to the supply of housing land or housing stock. And Historic England's comments on this application are they identified some modest impact on the conservation area and the listed church, but they do recognise that the layout is designed to minimise that impact because it does responds to the character of the place. And when we look at the layout, we can look at that in a little bit more detail. And Historic England go on to say that the harm could be justified if the principle of development's accepted, and you weigh that harm against the public benefit. So here's a photograph looking from the road opposite the site entrance. That's an existing entrance onto the land. There's the property to be demolished, and that's the one that's to be altered and converted into a semi-detached property. I'll just mention at this point that Frinton and Walton Town Council have objected to the application, and one of the reasons is they cite this as being a busy junction. We've also had 21 letters of objection to the proposal. Again, some of those comments relate to highways matters. This is a view looking from east to west along the street, and the site entrance is in here. Again, that's the property to be altered, and this one is the property to be demolished. And that's a view looking straight into the access. And then there's a couple of shots of the land at the back of the site, which forms the bulk of the site. As I said, you will have seen various sort of incidental buildings on the site which would be demolished, along with number 19. And a condition is recommended to undertake a contaminated land survey if this proposal goes ahead, because of the buildings and the uses that have been on the site. That's a view from within the site looking back towards the road, and number 19 can just be seen over the top of the shrubs there. Again, into the depths of the site. Actually, while we're on there, I'll just mention here that there was a phase 1 habitat survey was undertaken into ecology, and it made various recommendations, most of which could just be conditioned. But one of the recommendations was for a great crested newt habitat suitability survey to be undertaken on a pond which is to the southwest of the site, so it's away from the site in a southwesterly direction. That survey concluded that the impacts on great crested newts are highly unlikely, but nevertheless a precautionary method statement has been produced, and we're recommending a condition to tie the development to that method statement. And Natural England have had no comments to make on this proposal. Another view across the site. In terms of archaeology, it's proposed to attach a condition requiring trial trenching because the site is close to the historic core of the village and adjacent to the church, which is a Grade 2 star dating back to the 14th and 15th century, and Kirby Hall is nearby as well. And so it would be sensible, necessary to undertake that archaeological investigation prior to development taking place. So this plan shows the access and the site layout, the two issues which are for detailed consideration at this point. The site measures 0.54 of a hectare, and that gives a density of 20 dwellings per hectare, so quite a low density development as you might expect on the edge of a rural settlement. The County Council have considered flood risk assessment, and they don't object, subject to the imposition of their standard conditions. Some of the objections we've had are to what's seen as a sort of backland nature of this development. But I'll just turn back now to the Historic England comments. In terms of impact on the church and the conservation area, Historic England were quite positive about the layout of the development because it sort of introduces a lane here which gives a little bit of separation from the church. It's a linear form of development which is more typical of the village than a normal sort of estate layout, and it means that these properties are fronting towards the church, giving a sort of more appropriate boundary than you would have if they were side on, or indeed if they backed on to the development. That run of houses are the three that would look across the boundary towards the church. They would lie in that new lane that would come into the site. But do remember that the detail of the elevations is not for consideration today. That's one of the reserve matters. And similarly, this is a potential design for one of the bungalows, or two of the bungalows. This plan is taken from the tree report. You will have seen various trees, mainly around the periphery of the site. In this corner, there's a TPO'd oak tree. The tree assessment that was undertaken and the council's tree officer's assessment of that is it would be adequately protected in this layout. But it has been identified that this group here, which is called Group 9, there would be some harm to some of those trees within that group, to the roots of them. However, there's also a power line along that edge of the development, and so there's already a necessity to undertake pruning to those trees to maintain some separation between the power lines and the trees. And taking that into account, the sort of additional pressure or damage from the development is thought not to be either substantial or to cause long-term harm to the trees, and so on balance would be acceptable. There's also a proposal for a condition to be attached so that details will be provided of tree protection and whether there would be the need for any special methods of construction in the vicinity of that group of trees. So in conclusion, the site is partly in the settlement boundary at the moment, but wholly within in the emerging plan. Access to the site is achievable and acceptable to the County Highway Authority. The proposed layout wouldn't harm neighbouring amenities, so these properties here, or cause significant harm to the heritage assets to the west of the site. And so on balance, the recommendation is one for approval, Chair.
Thank you very much. And now we get to public speaking. At the present moment, I have one member of the public speaking against the application. It's Richard Everett, councillor of this parish, but he's speaking as a member of the public in this particular case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors, I have concerns about this application relating to the effects of the development on the Grade 2 listed church immediately adjacent to the proposed development. St Michael's Church is a Grade 2 star listed church and as such warrants special consideration determining this application. It is one of only a few surviving churches with arguably Norman features, so understanding its setting is absolutely fundamental to determining this application. The National Planning Policy Framework is very clear in its guidance to decision makers, and it says in paragraph 132, when considering the impact of a proposed development on the significance of a designated heritage asset, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation, and significance can be harmed or lost through alteration or destruction of the heritage asset or development within its setting. As heritage assets are irreplaceable, any harm or loss should require clear and convincing justification. And in paragraph 134, where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. So to reiterate, the NPPF says that there needs to be convincing justification to harm the asset, and that in this case it should be weighed against the benefits or disbenefits of the development. So basically what they're saying is that this is a weighing up exercise for you as members of the Planning Committee. You're in charge of that weighing up of any benefits, disbenefits, and assessments of convincing justification. Historic England. Thankfully, your job has been made clearer by Historic England, who point out, Historic England consider that this would cause some modest harm to the significance of the village conservation area and to that of the parish church. So Historic England considers that harm will occur to the historic asset and that this should be weighed against the benefits and disbenefits of the application in line with NPPF paragraph 134. There's been a long-standing approach of this committee that weighing up of competing arguments for and against an application is essential for making fair and considered planning determinations. It is rightly commented upon by members that it is not advisors that make the decisions, but the committee. The committee has the right to decide on weighing and the significance of evidence before it. is not for advisors such as, for example, Essex County Council Highways, or in indeed this case Historic England, to make the decision. That right is yours, taking into account their advice as material considerations. It's quite clear that Historic England have given you the evidence with which you could, if you were so minded, refuse this application. It is for you to decide whether you wish to use their advice, and I invite you to do so on the grounds that the benefits of the application do not outweigh the disbenefits of the harm accorded to the setting of the historic asset of St. Michael's Church. I do not believe that clear and convincing justification has been demonstrated in this case, so I entreat you to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is members of the public trying to get in. I don't know, they keep appearing at the door, but then... Good. Right, thank you very much. Now, the ward member, although he called it in, has not asked to speak tonight. In fact, he's not here tonight. In that case, I turn now to the applicant, Mr. John Spencer, if he would like to come forward and speak. Welcome, sir. Get yourself settled, and once you've got the mic down, you've got 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good evening, thank you. We'd just like to point out this application. We've worked with all the consultants very closely, including English Heritage, who John Newell head has accepted the closeness to the church, and we worked closely to design the 3 houses in the style of the church with the stone work. He's quite happy with that. We've also worked with Highways and all the other consultants. The application's been a long time to get to this stage, but hopefully we've got a recommendation of approval now, and we'd like you to go forward with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I don't know whether the officer wants to make any further comments. No, she says. So, committee members, it's down to you now. You went to the site this morning, and I have to say I was pleased that we weren't there 24 hours earlier with the weather conditions, but it was very nice on that site. So, it's over to you. Speakers, please.
Well, oh, she says.
Right, yes.
Sorry, yeah, when I gave you the update, I did skip over one point, which I should have highlighted, and that's in the report. In one sentence, it says that the council can't demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, but it can demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, I could say with some confidence. So, sorry about misleading you.
I'll say something if
Please.
nobody wishes to go forward.
Yes, Councillor Heaney.
I have to say, I agree with Councillor Everett. And this morning, when I was there, and I talked to the chairman of the parish council, I think the lady is, she said that they're cutting down the trees that are between this development and the church because their trees are sucking up so much water that the church has become unbalanced owing to the foundations are going and it's falling outwards. Now, with the trees cut down, it's going to be right in this development will be really on top of the church. And for that reason, I feel, with Councillor Everett, that it will cause more than modest harm to a Grade 2 starred listed church is too much. And it'll, with the trees gone, which are really not particularly good trees, they're sycamores and things like that. So, and they're obviously not going to put any more trees in because of what's happening to the church. I really feel I can't vote in favour of this.
Thank you very much. Other speakers? Yes, Councillor.
Oh, sorry. They want to do that.
Yes. What provision is it on the border of the hedge between the church and the development? What provision is there for keeping that? If we was in mind to pass it, that border or separation as regards the foliage and the trees would be important.
Thanks. Landscaping isn't actually one of the matters to be considered at this stage, which I know sort of makes your job a little bit more difficult in a way because you haven't got the full details. But obviously there is landscaping there at present of that particular boundary. It's of mixed value, mixed quality. But there's certainly the potential, there's the room to replace some where needed or to retain those that are worthy of being retained. But I can't show you the final details of that tonight. That's something that would come in at a later stage.
Yes, come back, Brian.
Well, as we walked through there, I mean, you didn't get a good view of the church because the foliage was quite good. If that's retained, it might go in favour of passing it. Just thought I'd mention that.
Thank you. Other speakers? Yes, Councillor Guglielmi.
What did Historical England say about the boundary for the church and because it isn't close to the church, the whole thing isn't close to the church. There's quite a big gap between the church and the hedge.
Yeah, okay, I won't read the whole of their response, but I'll try and pick out the most relevant parts. It says the development has been conceived in a manner intended to complement the historic character of the village and the setting of the church. Instead of a conventional modern close of houses or bungalows, a form of development alien to historic villages, the development would take the form of a lane lined with houses to its east and bordered by the trees at the edge of the churchyard to its west. Further housing, bungalows, would be built to the east of the lane. The development would have a sympathetic relationship both to the village and to the churchyard. And then he talks about the design of the houses, but recognises that that may not be for determination at the moment, which it isn't. So, to sum up, he says that any harm would be modest, and the care taken in the disposition and design of the development mean that any harm would be justified insofar as it has been minimised. It will be for the council to weigh the modest harm which would be caused by the proposed development against the public benefit brought by the provision of new housing.
Yeah, these houses, we're not determining that tonight, just that they can be built, aren't we? Well, at the moment, the piece of land looks absolutely disgusting with all those Nissen huts on it anyway. I mean, it's got development on it. It's got the Nissen huts, hasn't it? Mm. So that might be a problem, just getting rid of them for a start. And if Historical England have no problem with it, and seeing, I went to that church when I was chairman, and I went to the church hall when I was chairman, seeing where it is, I honestly don't think, the only thing is the entrance, because it's almost opposite the entrance to the recycling centre. That would probably be the only thing I'd have an issue with, is moving it so it wasn't totally opposite where the recycling centre is.
If I can add 2 pence to that, we're saying that English Heritage don't object to it, and the same thing applies to Essex County Highways. They don't object to it, although it's been pointed out to them that it is right opposite this junction. And as consultees, whether we like it or not, they must be considered. Yes?
Yeah.
Please.
I just wonder, going back on what Councillor Guglielmi was saying there and the response, comments regarding the lane and the houses, what was written in the report is looking at what is actually being produced before them there. Now, we know only too well things can change. We can't vote on that at the moment until it comes back into reserved matters. But so will Historical England, will they be able to report back on the design when it comes through? Because that might make, I'm just wondering if that will make a difference.
It's slightly unusual, this application, because actually you are being asked to consider layout, but not the elevations. And so in terms of the position of the lane, the layout of the position of the dwellings in that linear form along the lane, that can be controlled. So if planning permission is granted tonight, then we recommend a condition which ties the developer to the approved plans. So in terms of layout, that would be fixed. And then it would just be the detail of the elevations that you would see at a later date. So in terms of the impact on the character of the church, the conservation area that Historic England were talking about, you would be able to sort of deal with that tonight and secure that type of arrangement.
Further questions? Yes.
Yeah, it said the trees are drying out the land and the church is starting to shift one way forward. I'm assuming that a lot of them, not so much trees, but most of the foliage along that edge there, they're going to take out.
They are.
And they're going
to me.
replant other. Is that correct? Going to
That
replant
one's the
something
trees.
else, or are they going to?
The trees in there belong to the church.
Landscaping isn't for detailed consideration tonight, so we don't know the final detail. But there's certainly been intention to retain landscaping along that boundary. I think because the condition and the species are not ideal, perhaps in some cases along there would be some replacement. It wouldn't be retention of everything that's there.
I think they belong to the church, those trees.
Okay, well obviously the ones that are in the church's control, this developer would have to work with the church or would have to leave them. But obviously any impact on the stability of the building, which actually the church is some way, isn't it, from that boundary, but that would be obviously an issue for the two parties to work together on outside the planning process. Really our main concern tonight is about the appearance, the impact on the heritage assets in visual terms.
Could I have a look at the on facing, the one's face, that's it, back there, isn't it? No, back.
Oh, the actual...
That's it.
No. So this application, those are only indicative. So tonight, if planning permission was granted, it wouldn't be granted for those specific designs, but it would be granted for a layout that included houses in those positions that are shown on the layout plan. So you'd still have another opportunity to deal with the detail of those elevations, the materials, the pattern of the windows, the overall design of those houses.
I mean, we've been to this site today was the third time we came to the site. I think the officers and the guy who's building them have obviously had quite a lot to say to each other, and with all the different departments, I really can't see any reason not to refuse this, so I'd like to put in for approval.
Right, I have a firm proposal, and now I'm going to Councillor Fowler, and then I will ask for a second.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to agree with my colleague, Councillor Hones, because I've just been going over the Historic England comment. The church was my concern, the setting of the Grade 2 star listed building. I know when we went there last time, the impact that the development would have on that building. But having seen it now from the other side and looking at the comment that was made, I'd like to second Councillor Hones' proposal to approve as per recommendation by the officers. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you. I have a proposer and a seconder. Anybody wish to comment before I take the vote?
I'd just comment for a second, if I can.
Yep.
I've just, I can see I'm going to be the only person who's going to vote against this, but I do feel with the trees gone, which I'm quite sure they will go, particularly those overgrown sycamores and things like that, those houses will be looking right into the setting of the church. They nearly come up as far as the church, and I think it's a great pity that, that they will... I know there's a gap and all that, but there will be no vegetation really without the trees, and there's a very, very thin line that the developer can put in without going on onto the St Michael's Church, and it seems unlikely that the PCC, whoever's in charge of the church, will be putting trees in again if the trees they've got are sucking up the moisture from the churchyard and causing the building to subside. Anyway, I've said my bit.
Right. Yes, Councillor Baker?
Chairman, I'm quite happy to agree with Councillor Holmes and his seconder, but we'll just make sure that the reserve matters come back to us, just to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm more concerned with what's going to look at the church.
Yes. Righto.
I agree with them. I think I had no problem with it, and I think when it comes back to reserve matters, that's when we have to look at the hedging and everything else, and the impact it has more so if it has an impact on the church, that when it comes back to reserve matters. But as a development, I've got no problem with it.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to take the vote then on that. Just see what the if there's any conditions that we need to. Yes, standard conditions. So the vote on this outline application is to accept it with the conditions that are shown on the top of page 9 to approve. So you know what you're voting for. Those in favour?
Sorry, Chair, and just to clarify, although I did mention the update, minus Part A and C, which referred to the 106 agreement, because that's no longer needed.
No. Thank you for that. Yes, it does. Right, so it's with that gone and with that gone. Right, and that it comes back to us then for the final details. Right, those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if I put my 2 penneth in, that will be 8. And those against? 1. That application, outline application, is approved. Thank you for that. Now we move on to agenda item 5, which is A2. That's a planning application, a detailed application for land southwest of Horsley Cross Roundabout, Clacton Road, Horsley Cross. And we turn to Suzanne with a new surname of Chapman Enos, planning team leader. For those that weren't aware, Suzanne got married about 3 months ago, month ago now. So, right, okay, straight to Suzanne.
Right, thank you, Chairman. So this application refers to lands at Horsley Cross Roundabout. Outline consent, including access to provide a new industrial park for B2 and B8 uses, including a bus depot and telecommunications mast, was granted in August 2014. The reserved matters for the telecommunication mast was granted in December 2014, so it's not for consideration for you this evening. This evening you're looking at the reserved matters application for appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, together with details in relation to conditions which are set out in the description and added as an appendices to the report. Plus information with relation to the air quality monitoring, which is required as part of the legal agreement. So this shows the application site outlined in red. You have the A120 along the northern boundary of the site, the cross-in public house, the other side of the roundabout, and you've got adjacent farm buildings in this location with the nearest residential property to the site there. So, as you will see from the aerial view and from the site visit, it's presently open agricultural land. It's being used for a weekly car boot sale during March to October. There's no significant features on the site, although there is area of landscaping close to the roundabout, and the site does slope downwards towards the brook towards the rear of the site. So this shows some photographs of the application site. That's taken from the road, looking towards the agricultural buildings and the neighbouring residential property, and that is the front boundary of the site, which is not marked. And that's looking the opposite way towards the roundabout and the A120, which runs along that boundary there. And again, that's a further view looking towards the neighbouring buildings. And that's looking towards the rear of the site, so it gives some indication of the drop in levels. And so this shows the proposed site plan. You've got 15 individual buildings, all of various sizes throughout the site, and each with a parking area. And in terms of elevations, got a variety of elevations. They're all fairly similar to provide a cohesive development. And as you'll see, they're of a fairly contemporary design with the use of low-pitched roof and curved roof. And they're of different colours and different types of cladding to provide variation throughout the site. All of the buildings are in accordance with the conditions on the outline consent, which restrict the heights of the buildings and require the provision of certain uses. And some of the buildings have mezzanine floors, generally with office accommodation within them. So that will show you what is being sort of proposed. In terms of landscaping, the landscaping is in sections. So you've got an area that shows part of the site. So it's got the A120. The development is set back from the A120 with an area of landscaping. And the trees proposed are a mixture of field maple, silver birch, oak trees and lime trees. And within the site you have smaller sort of areas of planting which are shown in those type of areas. Our landscape officers looked at the scheme and raises no objection to the provision of these species and to the planting scheme. And this is towards the brook, so you've got a larger area which would be sort of a meadow area to provide the separation. And that's showing the side with the neighbouring property. And in terms of, it shows a section through the site, so it indicates the height difference, and you can see the heights of the proposed buildings, and that's looking at the towards that area of the site, so towards the other side of the site, the A120. So overall, it's considered that the proposal will result in no material harm in terms of the design and the appearance and layout, and will facilitate substantial economic development within the district, and therefore is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, the only person who's indicated he wishes to speak is Mr. Legree, who is the agent for the site.
Evening, Chairman, members. Chairman, you heard this morning on the site visit from Mr. Rayner, who's the Chairman of Mistley Parish Council, and in whose ward this little parish this is. And you heard that he was in support of the application. His parish council has been very supportive throughout the whole process. You also heard this morning that there is some discussion, some considerable discussion about potential uses of the site, and one in particular which is currently in the Mistley area. Those discussions are very advanced, and hopefully we'll be able to bring some news on that in the not too distant future. Similarly, there has been a considerable number of discussions with other companies. I can't provide details at the moment due to contractual and legal issues, but nevertheless, just to say that there is considerable interest. That interest, I have to admit, has only been forthcoming in the last 12 months or so, since myself and a development company have been involved with this scheme. It is unfortunate that it does seem that the landowner was previously not best advised with the development of this site, and noting from the parish councils at Little Bentley and Little Bromley, they've questioned the timescale that's been involved in this case. It's been a long time coming, and that's very much the case. But what has happened over the past 12 months or so has been a completely different approach to this site, with a different land agent who you also met on site this morning, and that's been a completely different attitude and results that have come from that. So we are very pleased to put forward this scheme. It has been a lot of work from our side. The outline plan permission has something like 30 conditions on it and a very extensive legal agreement with numerous schedules within it. We've worked entirely within that. This scheme meets all those criteria. And we believe that the scheme now achieves a development that can be forthcoming, and hope that members will now support this and bring some very, we believe, needed investment in employment into this part of the district. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. No, we haven't got any more speakers on that. I'll start the questioning, I think. We see on one of our conditions that there is a radio mast or telecommunications mast. That's already approved. I'm just asking the officer if it shows on there, I believe, but I'm not sure it's in the same spot as the approved spot.
Right, just to clarify, the plans have been amended to show it in that location. Sorry, it's not very clear given the scale of the plan, but it's shown in this location, which as is where was approved under the 2014 Reserve Matters consent.
Right, thank you. That answers that question. Yes.
Alexander and then
Councillor Alexander, and then I'll take Councillor Guglielmi.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very much in favour of this application because I believe it is needed for this area. In my mind, it ticks all the right boxes, and I do agree it's been around for a long, long time. We desperately need places like this that outside of residential use, commercial can use, and the fact that a broadband has been given permission, a mast, it proves that we can move on and it'll be a benefit for us, especially as we head towards 2019 and Brexit, when we will need to be able to be self-sufficient in all manners. If the occasion arises at this time, I would be minded to move approval.
Right. Councillor Guglielmi.
When we were on site this morning, when we were looking at this, we were sort of informed that the piece of the land on the edge of the site was being kept so that it could be used if they wanted to widen the A120. Is that in writing?
Yeah, the plan is not clear on this scale, but the plan does show there's a dotted line just along there. And that is shown and marked as being for future widening of the A120, and they will be conditioned to be in accordance with these plans.
Right. Councillor Heaney.
I was very pleased to see someone who frequently see this building, that they were not going to be built as solid blocks of colour, as far as I can gather. And I did mention it to Mr. Legree, and he said they're going to, the colour's going to be graduated up, and so it's sort of growing up from greens to greys, isn't it? And the roof is going to be low pitched with a curve. And I also have to say, I said to the agent that acers don't grow around here, but I didn't realise what I was talking about was field maple, which grow like weeds. I was totally wrong there.
All right. Yes. Yes, Councillor.
Can I just ask the officer to go back to that? Thank you. You showed us pictures of varying heights. Obviously, as the land dips down towards the west, are the higher buildings going to be at the bottom of the site towards the brook, which would make sense so that they sort of all look like a uniform size?
Right, so in terms of the height of the buildings, on the outline consent there was a condition that said no building on the northern boundary of the site, which is that boundary, shall exceed 10 metres in height, and no other building shall exceed 12 metres in height. So the lower buildings are along this boundary, and the higher ones are along the southern part.
Yes, come back, Councillor.
Thank you for that. I'd be quite happy then to second Councillor Alexander's proposal.
Right. And Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chairman. I can't see anything wrong with it at all, and I agree with everybody else. My only concern, small as it is the one dwelling in the right-hand bottom corner. Their way of life is going to be quite upset by this in many respects. And I would like to ask if there's going to be any sensitive screening for sound, vision, and maybe light pollution. I'd like to see some extra screening in that area.
Right.
So in terms of the impact of this development, that was considered in general at the terms of the outline stage. This area shows the landscaping, so there is some landscaping proposed, but no details of any additional fencing or acoustic barriers. But you will see that the buildings are orientated. So this main building is orientated so it faces into the site, and that is side on, so there wouldn't be sort of direct impact. There wouldn't be lighting directly onto that property.
Can I come back?
Right, Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to add, I'm pleased that Councillor, what's his name sitting there, Baker, sorry. Do beg your pardon. He actually answered a question that I wanted to ask about the height of the buildings and how that would be in definition of the slope on the property, and I'm pleased to be saying that I would support it now. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Heaney.
Councillor Holmes after me. I just wanted to ask about the lighting. I presume they're going to be downlighters and not sort of... Is there any information on the lighting? I don't seem to pick that up when I read it. Perhaps I missed it.
So at this stage there is no detailing of the lighting. There is a condition on the outline consent which requires that no street lighting, flood lighting or other means of illumination outside of the building shall be erected without having details of that approved by the local planning authority. So there will be details of lighting, it's just not at this stage. That would happen prior to commencement of development.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, sorry. Councillor Brown said that, is that a house there, that little thing there? Yes. That is a house, is it? Because all this here is a chicken farm, isn't it? There's no actual... It's just that little house down the bottom there, isn't it? Well, I'm sure that the officers and the builders can get together and do something for the people in that house. If nothing else, I mean, other than that, I can see no reason for refusal. Thank you very much.
Right. Before I take the vote, I've got a proposer and a seconder for it. In the conditions, there seems to be only one condition because previously conditions were in the the first time when it came to us. Would it not be prudent to put a time limit on there now?
Because it's a reserved matter applications, all the conditions on the outline consent still apply, and they are limited. The time limit is controlled by that. So they've got 2 years to start the development after approval of the last reserved matters. So this would be the last reserved matters. So there's no need to put any further conditions on because it's not a consent in its own right. It sits with the outline consent.
Okay, that's it then. So, councillors, you know what you're voting on, with just one condition over and above those previously agreed. That one condition is on page 30, so that you know what you're voting for. Those in favour, please show, and that will be unanimous in that case. So that detail application is now approved. Right. Thank you very much. And now I shall adjourn from the seat and hand over to my vice chairman for this particular one.
Thanks, John.
Use that.
Yeah, I better swap. Councillor, what's his name? How do you do? If I remember to turn this microphone on. Would you like to present it?
I'll just take you through the green sheet initially because there's quite a few changes on there. So under A, there's just some errors in the committee report that require correction. So there's reference to 6 stories, or it should say 7 stories for that rear block. Also 4th floor, it should say 3rd. Orwell Road needs to be included in the list that the proposal will be clearly visible from. That's directly opposite the site. And just some typographical errors on the second part. Essex County Council SUDS have also commented on the amended surface water drainage information. That's there in full. They're still upholding their objection. And there's been a tweak to the reason for refusal in relation to SUDS following their concern in relation to water pollution as well. So that's just been added into the wording of the reason for refusal. Under D, you can see that the applicants requested the application be deferred to a later meeting on the basis that the committee report has raised a few unexpected issues and they'd like the opportunity to carry out further work to address them. The issues there are summarised on your report. The Vice Chair considered these issues that were raised and decided not to allow deferment for the reasons outlined in my response under Planning Officer response there. And later, an email has been received today from the applicant confirming this amended description of development, which is on the screen there, basically agreeing that this would be described as an apart hotel rather than holiday flat. So it's a hotel but with apartments rather than rooms, as you'll see on the plans, and that's within use class C1, which is the hotel use class. And just minor changes in relation to referring to the cycle parking within the description, which weren't there before. So those changes don't raise any issues in relation to the matters that have been summarised in the report, so I'll take you through the presentation. This is the site plan, shows the building before it was demolished here. The Clacton seafront conservation area runs around the footprint of the previously demolished building there, so this is within the conservation area. The rear block is outside, but obviously very close to the conservation area. It's also wholly within the town centre boundary for Clacton. This shows the site before the building was demolished here, and the single-storey elements at the back. This was all the taller sections, and this is the depth of the site where these trees have been removed, but these are the protected lime trees that are still there, the 2 lime trees. This is the current site view. You can see it's all been cleared. You've got the 2 limes. One's been pollarded, and then you've got the larger lime that you would have seen today. This is the view of the rear access here, which goes along the side of the post office building, and the properties in Beach Road here that are referred to in the reasons for refusal, the 4 dwellings. And you've got Strebler House here, which is flats, which drops down to 2-storey at the back. This is the view from Beach Road. This is the largest of the limes. The other one is tucked in next to it. It's been pollarded. And the previous buildings were in here. This is the immediate neighbour and the other neighbour here to the other side. So the buildings would be clearly visible from here with the 4-storey here and the 7-storey at the rear. This is looking down Rosemary Road to the immediate neighbour here at 28 Rosemary Road. Looking up Orwell Road to the cleared site. And looking back at Rosemary Road, you've got the covered market and you can see the protected tree there in the back. So this is a photo of the demolished building. This was taken down under a building notice in February 2016 because it posed a serious safety risk. That was in consultation with the council's structural engineers. It needs retrospective planning permission as it was in a conservation area. But you'll see from the report that we have no objection to that element of the proposals as it's been a long time since it's contributed to the conservation area positively. These were the elevations of that building. You can see it's quite shallow at 4-storey to the tower, but a tall 3-storey, then the 3-storey villas. So it wasn't listed, but it was an undesignated heritage asset of significance locally as the former Osborne Hotel and the 2 adjacent villas which were among the first parts of Clacton to be developed. These are the floor plans, so you've got ground floor, and it shows you that this element is single-storey, and this was the 3 up to 4 storeys in the tower. And that's the roof plan. So you'll see, this, as I say, a split recommendation to approve the retrospective demolition subject to a condition relating to boundary treatment so that we can ensure that they're maintained in a reasonable condition. This is the proposed block plan, so you've got what I referred to as the front building here and the rear building here. This is 4 storeys and the rear building is up to 7 storeys. And you've got this courtyard in the centre with cycle parking here. And you've got the immediate neighbours. This is the Strebler House flats that I refer to, and these are the Beach Road properties with their gardens along the boundary. Then you've got flats at the above the High Street buildings over there. And the vehicular access off Beach Road here or off Rosemary Road here, and into the back with a car lift down to the basement car park and then up and out onto Rosemary Road this way. So that's the basement car parking plan that shows 35 car parking spaces, 10 motorcycle, then there's 56 cycle spaces up on the ground floor level. This is the proposed ground floor plan of both buildings. So you've got 3 retail or restaurant units within the front building, and then the rear building is 100% apartment hotels. We've got no objection to the uses in this town centre location, and the previous main use of the building was as a hotel. So this is the floor plans of the front building. So the first, second, third and roof plan, there's shaded areas of the balconies. You've got 1 front balcony, and then these are the rear balconies. And these are the elevations of the front building. So you can see the Rosemary Road 2-storey property here, and the building would be significantly taller. You've got the balconies here, which are in the corners of the building at the back, and this would be the rear elevation, which would face onto the other building. You can see that it's a plain design with little variation in the fenestration on the materials. It's solely constructed of brick. This is the floor plans of the rear building. So the ground floor was on the previous plan. Here you've got 1st to 4th floors. These are balconies on the 2nd floor that I refer to overlooking the Beach Road gardens. Then you've got a glazed winter garden here up at 4th floor, which is a communal. 5th floor, you've got balconies looking the other direction, and then at 6th floor, again, you've got balconies here, which serve that same unit. So again, they're all self-contained holiday apartments. And these are the elevations of that building. So you've got the Beach Road back gardens here, so rising to 2 storeys and 4 with the winter garden and the balconies in these locations, and another one over here. So again, this is the same design as the front elevation, so we've got an objection on the grounds of the design, also failing to preserve the character and appearance of the Clacton seafront conservation area because of the excessive scale, particularly this rear block, which goes up to 7 storeys in the centre. Also loss of privacy to those 4 properties on Beach Road, and loss of privacy and light to the flats on the High Street. There's also the SUDS objection, which hasn't been overcome. So just to remind you, this was the scheme that came to committee in January 2016, which members resolved to approve for 23 flats and 2 retail units, subject to a 106 towards affordable housing and public open space. The applicant states that was unviable, but no evidence of this has been provided, so that scheme has now been replaced by the current apartment hotel scheme. So that showed the retail units at the front with flats above and Hunt completely flatted scheme at the back. There was no vehicular access from the back in this proposal, it was only through the front here. This was the front block, so you had a much more traditional design, picking up features that are common along Rosemary Road in terms of the materials and the window details and bay windows, and the mansard roof, which reduces the bulk of that top floor. You can see it steps down in relation to the neighbouring properties and was quite closely reflected the scale of what was there before. That's the rear elevation. And then this was the rear block, which was 3 stories. So the application is recommended for approval in relation to the demolition, but refusal in relation to the design, as you can see within the report. Thank you.
I'll come to you, Linda, but I've just got I've got some speakers. We've got no speaker in favour, member of the public speaking in favour of the application. Then we have a member of the public speaking against the application, which is, I guess we can call you Councillor here, John White, as opposed to Mr. John White.
Right, councillors, it's at times like this that I realise how short 3 minutes is when an application appears to break so many of the rules. However, I'll try and keep my talk briefly to just 3 subjects. Item 1, the front block of 3 commercial units and 17 flats in Rosemary Road, which is inside the conservation area. I've got no comments on the 3 commercial units. However, the building, which ultimately will be 4 stories high, would be completely contrary to QL9 and QL11 in its height, mass and design, and it would not fit in with the conservation area. Item 2, the proposed rear building, 6 or 7 stories high, would be a building overlooking many properties. It would be seen from Rosemary Road, Beach Road, High Street, Orwell Road and Cone Road, and would result in material harm to the visual amenity. It makes no positive contribution to the local environment and does not enhance the area in any way, and therefore it's contrary to EN17 in the 2007 plan and also to PPL 8 in the new plan. Finally, I would draw your attention to the proposed vehicular entrance for the 51 suggested properties and 3 shops. It's suggested that all the vehicles should enter from that very narrow alleyway, which has to service all the shops and flats on the south side of High Street. As we saw this morning, it's already full of vehicles. It is no use that the applicant provides 56 cycle spaces. This is not the Netherlands, this is Britain. We should be looking for an absolute minimum of 51 car spaces. Councillors, I hope that just those 3 items alone will persuade you to accept the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. There are a lot of other reasons covered by QL9, QL11, EN13, TR1A and TR7 in the 2007 plan, together with PPL5, PPL8 in the proposed new plan, which also point to refusal. So I hope you will accept your officer's recommendation to refuse this application.
Thank you very much, Councillor White. There is no parish or town council in Clacton. We don't have a ward member present, but Mr. Royston Simmons is the applicant or agent for representation. If you'd like to come, as you're coming. Now, you have 3 minutes in which to speak too. You press the switch in the middle and then
Hello?
Yes, you're going.
Okay. Thank you very much. First comment I'd like to ask Planning Department, has Historic England been consulted regarding the conservation area and the impact on it?
If you speak and then come back afterwards.
Okay, so I would like to ask that question. Secondly, I'd also like to point out that in the report it states that regarding the distance between the properties at Beach Road now and the previous drawings is now less, going from 3 metres, was 5.4 metres, now is 3 metres. The 5.4 metres was regarding a 3-storey height building. This is a 2-storey height building that starts on the Beach Road. It is then set back an additional 5.7 metres. The whole idea of this is to create a completely green oasis that Beach Road looks at. They will not be looking at a building. The drawings all show privacy screens with 1.7 metre full planting in front of these. There has been not one objection. I've knocked on every single door regarding businesses, the owners, the residents, and there has not been one single objection to this design or application. The second part regarding the mass of the front building. The mass of the front building has actually been reduced from what you approved in 2016. You'll note that in the approved drawing, the building went all the way down to the pavement, also added bay windows, which made the bulk of the building far greater. We have actually given more amenity space back to the pavement. The height is slightly reduced from the original that was proposed, and regarding the views, at present the views regarding a previously building that hasn't been there for 2 years, and prior to that a building that was wrapped in scaffolding, did not enhance the conservation area one part for a period of 6 years. The view regarding Orwell Road now, you would be looking back at in the conservation appraisal that was done in 2001 and adopted in 2006 and hasn't been reviewed since. The states the ugly building which is number 24 Rosemary Road, which contains a pie and mash shop. Regarding what the outlook and the in-view would be from Orwell Road will be outstanding compared to what it has been.
Can you wind up now, because you've had 3 minutes.
In regards to looking at the west elevation, you would have visited site, and if you turned left, you would have seen the east elevation, which is a full brick building. It's also, once that's developed, which is number 50 Rosemary Road, Rumours Nightclub, the bulk and mass of that building as a view from the conservation area within its setting will be far greater than any implication of what we're proposing here.
Thank you. Would you mind, turning off? Thank you very much. Do you wish to say anything else, Mrs. Newland?
I'll just come back on some of those points raised by Mr. Simons. No, there isn't a Historic England consultation on this because they're not a statutory consultee for this type of development. The Beach Road separation distance, let me show you. So this was I think it was 5.4 from the boundary to the back boundary of the Beach Road properties, and this was 3-storey, as you can see there. And then the current proposal here is now a 4-metre separation to those boundaries. And you've got 2-storey here with the gardens on the top. So obviously it is closer to the boundary, but it's lower, as Mr. Simon said, and proves it would have been this sort of height at this distance. But obviously we had a maximum of 3-storey in the previous proposal, where you've now got this increasing bulk up to 7 stories. the mass of the front building being reduced. So this was the front building previously. You can see its height in relation to the Pie and Mash building next door, 28, and the two-storey properties to this side. And here you can see, I'd say the height is comparable. Obviously, we've got a flat roof now where we had a mansard roof before, so it would have slightly pitched back. And you've got this setback element up here. So from street level, you would see the development at this height, which would be an acceptable step up from the neighbours. But clearly from this view, you appreciate the top floor there, adding a lot of bulk at the back of these Rosemary Road properties, which you can see in the long views here over these hipped roofs. So you'd see that up above here. Also, Mr. Simons referred to the setback from the pavement that we didn't have previously. So here you've got bays overhanging, and it's sat on the back edge of the pavement here, you can see. And that is now set back slightly, but that's quite a minor change. Here you can see it's set back slightly, and the top floor hangs over slightly. You can see it shaded there in the elevations. This section projects forward slightly from this, so it still appears slightly as two separate elements. I haven't got anything further to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. One or 2 points that I'm sort of picking up on here. It is a conservation area, and to use a phrase, at the end of the day, it still is a conservation area. And having looked at it this morning and seeing the height, if you can visualise the height compared with the buildings that are around it already, that would terrifically overshadow the whole area, in my opinion. I agree with what the officers have said at this point, that it should be recommended for refusal. The point that you raised about saying that the internal design now, that's going to be a hotel, as classed as a hotel. But looking at the drawings, obviously that's still as though it's going to be apartments. So we would, if that did go for approval, we'd have to watch that surely to make sure it still remains as hotel rooms instead of. And also, having removed the character of the previous property, at least the one that was going to be built in its stead, or I appreciate that that was all going to be demolished anyway, but it was going to be building something similar as to what was already there, that had been there in history, and that is of concern that what we've got is a very flat facade there now, and it does concern me, and I can agree with what the officers are saying, and I would go for the recommendation of refusal, but that's my opinion.
Thank you. Are you moving refusal or?
Yes, I'm happy to do that, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, and I'm grateful for the officer for putting what has been approved previously, because I think that gives us a complete view of what was approved and what now wants to be approved. I noticed in the officer's report that with regard to the first application that still stands, I'm presuming, that the applicant was going to state that proposal was financially unviable, and this application is to make it viable. However, there's no assessments for either been provided to confirm that. Would you expect for this application a viability assessment with regard to make it viable? Thank you.
A bit just to clarify, so this is still the same application. We had the previous proposal for the flats that members resolved to approve, subject to a Section 106 agreement. Then the applicant had 6 months to complete the Section 106 agreement. They then said that the proposal wasn't viable. So at that stage, they could have submitted a viability assessment to prove that it couldn't make the contributions towards affordable housing and public open space as we'd required in the recommendation. But that didn't happen. As an alternative, they submitted the amended plans for the apartment hotel. So this has never had, hasn't had planning permission. It had a resolution to approve, and then the applicant has amended. So this isn't a fallback position, but it was something that we officers and members supported previously. So we haven't had a viability assessment, but it's the applicant's view that this scale of development isn't viable and that's why he's amended the scheme.
Councillor Guglielmi.
I wasn't here when the first scheme was obviously approved, or when it came to us. How many parking places, and was it the same kind of parking on the first plan?
It was in relation to 23 flats, I think it was before, so it was a lot lower scale development. Obviously, we had 4, 5, 6. I think that's 12 spaces, isn't it, there? And then we had a large cycle rack as well. We considered that was acceptable because it's such a sustainable location. There are relatively small flats where you could get around on a bicycle or you can walk to the train station. So that level of parking was acceptable and in accordance with policy for reducing parking in sustainable locations.
And they weren't underground?
No, they were on the ground level. There was no basement in the residential proposal. That's only in the holiday units.
The structure of the houses round it, I mean, obviously I'm not a builder, but the structures of the houses round it and the other buildings, when you're digging into a basement to make it safe enough for for cars to go down in a lift and then to come up again, would that undermine the structures of the other buildings around it?
That would be
sorry.
Thanks. That would be a building regulations assessment, that whether the building's safe, and if it couldn't be constructed safely, then they wouldn't have building regulations approval and they would have to submit an alternative design. But that's not something that they have to demonstrate at planning stage.
I just asked you a question. I think that they do they'd have to pay for surveyors for all the buildings around. I think that's happened. If they're digging basements in somewhere like London, I know that the people digging the basements have to pay surveyors for all the locals, all the houses near them. And this might be the same case here legally, which must be very expensive. I mean, I can't say that's strictly true, but I think it probably would be. Anybody else? Councillor Baker. Oh, sorry. I've crossed out, instead of crossing out Councillor Guglielmi, I crossed out you, Councillor Alexander, and then Councillor Baker.
I have to say, Chair, that I find this quite a daring application, and maybe in a different location with easier access, this could have possibly have worked. And I can see where the developer is coming from. But my concerns are entrance and exit. Knowing Rosemary Road for the last 60-odd years, I know what it's like when it gets busy. And it gets busy basically every day, 7 days a week, and parking is a nightmare. At the rear of it, in which I believe, if I'm incorrect here, please correct me, that would be the entrance in that tiny little road that leads from the back of the covered market. Am I right?
Yes, that's right. Access
Thank
from
you.
the boat to the rear and then egress onto Rosemary Road here.
It would appear from the discussion we had that road is actually under the ownership of the people who have the buildings down there, and you own your bit to the centre. And looking at the surface and the material that has been used, surely that's not been made by the public purse. That is private, and it looks private. And the ability to be able to just park there and to unload and to load into your premises. And today we saw that our minibus wouldn't go down there for a start, and the guy told me straight. And the other thing was there was a car park behind us blocking the entire road off. Now, how is it possible to be able to create so much parking space for cars coming and going and not being able to gain access? The road is not suitable for it. I'm going to have to go with refusal with my colleagues on that issues alone. But a daring application all the same.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just quickly rereading the Highways Department comments. They've got each new property shall be provided with 2 parking spaces, and then later on we've got there should be a maximum of 54, because obviously there's 51 flats and the businesses. A lower provision of vehicle parking may be appropriate. Well, I must admit, if this is going to be, and the application is for a hotel, apartment, apart hotel, whatever you want to call it, they're not all going to come by train. So they're going to be 51 people potentially, or one in a park, and they're not going to be able to. And I totally agree with the officer's recommendation. Too big. The original one I could probably accept, but this is far too big and will stick out like a sore thumb, so I will support refusal.
Does anybody want to second Councillor McWilliams? Did you second it? You seconded it, you, sorry?
Could you just clarify, because we need to vote on the demolition?
Yes, the two things, yes. Well, first of all, as Mrs. Newlands just reminded me, before we go, I'll just ask, does anybody else want to say anything else? Councillor Baker.
You need a proposer for the first part, I'm presuming, that we accept that they've knocked it down. And,
yes.
And we give them planning permission
to do what they've already done.
Can we do that first, or do we do the refusal and the second?
We do them separately, presumably.
Yeah, you will do it separately, but seeing as you've actually gone on to the second bit first, I suggest that seeing as you've got that mover and seconder and it's actually on the floor, you might as well make the decision on that bit first, and then we'll go back to the first bit second, if that's okay. So you're looking at the second part, which is the new application, not the demolition.
Okay. Is any... all those in favour of the application, please show. All those against, please show. Well, that is so long since I've done that. What do I say? Turned down, or what is it? I've forgotten now. Refused. Thank you so much. You get out of practice of doing this, I have to say. You think you know it all until you do it again. Councillor Baker.
Then I propose that we agree with the officer's recommendation to demolish it. That's already happened. That's already happened.
Seconds that too. All those in favour of the demolishing that's already done. But to be fair to them, it was so dangerous that it had to be done. Yes. Yes. So the demolition is approved and the application is universally refused by the whole planning committee. Thank you very much. And I think that's the end of everything, unless there's anything else to say. Quickest planning committee. And thank you very much for your borough.
Oh, thank you.
I couldn't believe that anybody wanted that monstrous